Alright, thanks to Holden Green for reviewing this one for us. He is the JRPG master and has played this series to death, so we've told him to focus on the changes that we've got on the Switch version. Etrian Odyssey is a niche but well-loved series that started out on the Nintendo DS before moving on to the 3DS. It took quite a few years, but now they're finally arriving on the Nintendo Switch. Sadly, not in the form of a brand new game, but remakes of the original trilogy. For those who missed out on the originals, is this triple pack worth picking up, or an Odyssey best avoided? Well, let's find out. As these are older titles, we'll be focusing more on what's new and how things have changed up since making the move to the Nintendo Switch, rather than critiquing the games themselves. Of course, we'll be touching on what makes them so loved by JRPG fans, just don't expect the usual type of SwitchUp review. Now, the premise for the Etrian Odyssey games are usually simple. Plot is relatively thin on the ground, with only one major goal for each game that's set out clearly from the beginning, and that is usually get to the end of the dungeon. They start off with a small plot device, but rarely does the story take precedence. Dialogue is few and far between, and cutscenes are almost non-existent. It's super old school, particularly in its approach, just like the classic dungeon crawlers we played as kids. These are games where dungeon crawling comes first and narrative second. With that in mind then, this trilogy is probably best served towards a niche audience. They may be from Atlas, but they're not Persona in their universal appeal. Now, Etrian Odyssey 1 and 2 previously had a remake on the 3DS, and those remakes added a much larger story if the player chose that option. For whatever reason, this aspect has not made it into the second remakes of the Nintendo Switch versions, which is quite frankly bizarre. I can't think of any other game franchise where the first remake of a game had more content than the second. Now, thankfully, the gameplay pulled me right back in, because this was always about the gameplay. Here you have a long dungeon filled with vast floors and jam-packed with monsters and hazards. Exploring the depths or heights of these locations is your ragtag team of created characters. From the start, you have to make a balanced team of fighters, with up to 5 in your party at once. Each game in this package has their own classes to work with. You'll find variations of standard ones such as a tank, the medic, the archer and so on, but it's not afraid to mix things up a bit, and finding the right team is your choice. You can name them and even choose their appearance, from the normal looking characters to the full-on, these ones. Atlas have got you covered. Each class has their own skill tree that has surprising freedom to them. It might look complicated at a glance, but once you figure out what all the numbers mean, it really is great to be able to focus on exactly what you want. You can see ahead to what attacks or abilities you want to unlock first, and also see which ones will complement your team better. For example, if you have an archer use poison attacks, maybe you have another fighter who can do extra damage to poisoned monsters. The battle system looks a little shallow when watching, but there is depth here. But while it's good, it's not really what the series is best known for. The Etrian Odyssey games are most well known for the self-mapping system. Due to the unique nature of the DS, the second screen was always dedicated to making your own map as you delved further and further in, drawing the path, the barriers, indicating the locations of doors, traps and places of interest, all with the magic of a stylus and a touchscreen. By this point in the video, you've probably seen it as having caused a bit of an issue with putting these games on a single screen system. You now have to do two things at once on one screen. You can play the game with the map on the side if you want, but it's certainly worth doing because, as I said, these floors are long and with endless twists and turns. You really need a map, so you're gonna have to make it work and make it yourself. If I'm being frank, it's not a perfect solution, because you use the D-pad to move your character and the analog stick to move the mapping function. If you've got 4 hands, you could do both things at once, but since we're not all Goro from Mortal Kombat, we have to compromise. You select which function you want with the ZR or ZL buttons, whether it be choosing the icon you want to place, or if you want to draw the path or draw the walls. It's just a little bit fiddly, especially in handheld mode where you need a magnifying glass just to work out what's going on. Now, sure, it is a bit fiddly, but after an hour or so you get used to it and it will almost become second nature. Compared to the original, it's inelegant, but maybe they did the best they could under these circumstances. And they probably knew that, because these games now feature an auto mapping option. Yeah, they allow you to take away the game's most famous aspect. In fact, there are 2 versions of the auto mapping, one that only does the path and one that does both the path and the walls. Having sampled the game with both of these options turned on at points and of course turned off, I have to say they made the experience worse. While I appreciate them being here, here, I found myself getting overly complacent when the auto mapping was turned on. I also wouldn't personally learn the maps as well, since I'd be going through them quickly rather than taking my time like you'd have to in the past. And looking at the giant zoomed out map, it ends up looking worse than if you had your own system. As far as accessibility options, there are many. Not only are there easier difficulties, speed up options and auto battles, there's an auto save alongside a large variety of others. I was especially happy to see a feature for left-handed players. This makes the map jump to the other side of the screen for those of us who are unfortunate enough to have to buy more expensive guitars or scissors. Thanks Atlas for thinking of us mutants. If only they'd thought of those with poor eyesight, because in handheld mode that big map is useless. You can't make out anything. So what else has been added? Well, you can see the visuals are now in lovely HD. Of course they aren't pushing the boundaries of technological possibilities on the Switch, but I think it looks rather lovely in a charming, homely kind of a way. It's certainly a step up from how they originally looked, but they've not overdone it. I think they've hit the perfect point between not enough and going too far. It retains that classic Etrian vibe, and the colours really sing from the screen. The character artwork is as lovely as ever. It's so distinctly Atlas. It's a shame we don't get to see our character choices more often, only in the menus and at the beginning. Almost feels like a waste we didn't see much of their designs in the battlefield. The music's also been remastered. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure I can hear too much of a difference. It still sounds like it's on a DS system, which could be a good or bad thing depending on who you asked. Personally, I like it though. It's not always what you'd expect from a dungeon crawling RPG, and that's what always stood out to me. So we've established that a fair bit has changed in the transition between the DS and the Switch, some for the better and some not so much. But is it worth it? Well, the price of this triple pack, if bought in a bundle on the eShop, is £71.99, or your regional equivalent. If that sounds expensive, wait until you hear that's the cheaper option, because if you don't fancy all of them, you can buy them individually for about 36 quid, which I find absolutely staggering, from the same company that recently gave us Persona 4 for £18, which, as much as I really adore the Etrian Odyssey games, Persona 4 is way better and with more content. This is one of those where the publisher knows this is a niche product and are pricing it accordingly. They're marketing it to fans of the series only. If they'd have followed the Persona pricing, I really think they could have brought in so many new fans. Instead, they're just going to make newcomers run for the hills. If you're on the fence with this, I'd advise waiting for a sale, and we'll be sure to let you know within our sales series when that happens. Overall, I do think these are good, but not entirely perfect renditions of three classic dungeon crawling RPGs. They're missing the content from the previous remakes, the map drawing isn't ideal, although I will cut them some slack, and the pricing seems misguided. But that doesn't take away from the great gameplay these provide, and now they're more accessible than ever, unless you have bad eyesight and only play on a Switch Lite. They look great, sound nice, and the battle mechanics are as decent as they've ever been. I definitely recommend these to hardcore fans, but those who aren't sure if they're ready for an RPG light on story but high on meticulously drawing your own maps, I'd advise waiting for some kind of discount. They get a SwitchUp score of 75%. Cheers Holden, I had a good chuckle recording that one. I think you told it perfectly, and the score sounds reasonable, especially if you're a big fan of the series and you find them on a sale. That low value score would shoot right up. Thanks to our Patreons and our members and all of you that enjoy the content. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!